to our pre-Hanukkah shiur called, I'm calling it My Hanukkah. What is Hanukkah anyway? And I actually want to begin before we jump into the actual topic with a little bit of an exercise. So whichever your preferred method of note-taking is, go ahead and get that ready. Whether you're a pen and paper kind of person, or if you want to just, it might actually just be easier to open a Word document on your laptop or computer if you're there anyway. I'm only going to have you write about 2 sentences, but I want you to be able to write them down on something that's handy. I see Holly's in the 19th century still, same as me. I like to write on pen and paper.
Maybe I will.
Do you know, I was the only one in my class at rabbinical school who took his notes on pen and paper. Everyone else was like tapping away in their laptop the whole time. All right, give folks a moment to get their stuff sorted.
You know, which makes it much harder to tell whether you're actually listening. You know, we have meetings at HP and everybody's on their laptops, and you go, is anybody really paying
that was part of it.
attention?
That was part of it for me. It was too easy to get distracted. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna put up our screen share here. Oh, actually, wait, I gotta take control of hosting first. There we go. Okay, so here's what I'd like you to write a little bit on. So I'd like you to write your responses to these 2 questions, and they are: first, what is Hanukkah about? What does it mean? You know, what is it for? Something along those lines. And answer in like 1 sentence, maybe 2 sentences tops. Doesn't have to be complete sentences. It doesn't really matter to me. Don't describe the ritual or the practice or anything like that. I want you to tell me about what you think it means in whatever sort of traditional or, you know, quote unquote, objective sense you understand it. What is Hanukkah about? What does it mean? And then write another sentence about what does Hanukkah mean to you, specifically to you. And that could be the same or different from sentence number 1. Either is okay. I mean, that's obviously a personal question, right? What does Hanukkah mean to you? Take a couple of moments of quiet, think about that. Write a sentence about what Hanukkah is about. What does it mean? And then also more personally, what does it mean to you? And we'll hold on to those, set them aside. You can then minimize that window or set aside your pad or paper. Obviously, we'll get back to those later.
Really fast, Rabbi, I don't think I had a chance to meet her yet. This is my little sister, Lily, who's staying with us. She's just coming to sit in for the lesson tonight.
You're most welcome. Thanks for joining us. You can play too. If you have a pen and paper and want to write, you're welcome to.
She is.
Okay. Okay. Everyone's welcome to play along. Scroll through the videos, see how many sets of eyes I see looking up from their pages. A couple of people still writing. That's okay. All right, if you're still going, consider that might mean you're writing too much and overthinking this. That's okay. This is just an exercise. It's not an exam. You don't have to turn this in at all. I'll ask you at a couple of points to share these out if you're comfortable, but you are by no means obligated. So the plan for this session is to learn together some of the rabbinic discussion around Hanukkah as it appears in the Talmud. I want to discuss with you some of the important ideas that come out of that discussion. First, we're going to have to kind of talk about what the Talmud is. I'm going to assume no particular level of familiarity with this kind of text or this kind of study. So we'll talk a little bit about what it is we're reading. We'll read that discussion and learn it together. That's going to take a little bit of guidance to understand really what's going on. But then I want to discuss the important ideas that come out of this discussion that pertain to the rabbi's understanding of what Hanukkah means. We've answered that question both sort of from our, our perspective about what we think the rabbis think about Hanukkah right now, and we've answered for ourselves. So we're going to dive into the Talmud text to try to figure out from their own words what it is that the rabbis thought Hanukkah means. We'll then return to our initial exercise here and do a little wrap up, and hopefully you can take something away with you that'll either reframe or enhance your understanding of Hanukkah and its meaning when it comes about in about a couple of weeks. All throughout, you are most welcome to ask questions at any time. All you got to do is take yourself off of mute and pipe up. That should pop you to the top of my my participants list. So you feel free to jump in whenever you like. And I do encourage question asking, whether it's a clarifying questions especially, I would say. I'd much rather you just go ahead and ask that than stay in the dark and not understanding something important. So go ahead and ask any questions you like, make any comments you like. You're welcome to share from your own personal experience. Yeah, I hope you enjoy. Okay. So very briefly about what it is we're going to be learning. We're learning from the Talmud. Now the Talmud is the kind of second layer of rabbinic commentary. The first layer being the Mishnah. The Mishnah was composed at around 220 CE, so sometime in about the 3rd century of the Common Era. The Mishnah itself came to be later came to be incorporated with something called Gemara, which is kind of an elucidation of the Mishnah. There's all sorts of related material in there. There's stories, there's opinions and rulings, there's legal discussion, all sorts of stuff. The Mishnah and Gemara together are what's known as Talmud. And the Talmud in that finalized form was composed in about 500 CE, so sometime in about the late 5th or early 6th century CE. So that's what I mean. It's kind of the second layer of rabbinic commentary. What we're going to read today reflects a record of opinions and rulings, stories of rabbinic sages over basically those first 5 centuries. There's sort of an anonymous editorial hand at work as well. We can take for granted that these were opinions held by actual rabbis, but the way they're organized has a certain it's intended to be didactic. Like it's intended to teach us something, and it's arranged deliberately. So a lot of times you'll find the text presenting itself as a conversation between 2 rabbis who may not have even necessarily lived or existed at the same time or ever met one another. The editorial hand, kind of operating behind the scenes and setting this up, has arranged those for us. It's structured and organized the material in an intentional way. That's not necessarily going to be the focus of what we're talking about, but I just want to give you an idea of what it is we're going to be reading. The Mishnah, and therefore the Talmud, since it's based on the Mishnah, is divided into 6 orders, what they call Sdarim, like Seder, like order, like your Passover Seder. Each one of those 6 orders is divided by more or less by topic into what are called tractates. We'll be reading from the second order, which is called Moed, festivals, which makes sense that Hanukkah would come up during a discussion of festivals more broadly. And Seder Moed has 12 tractates in it, all covering all the major and minor festivals, the rules, the prohibitions, readings on those days, the rituals that are involved. So I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the first passage we're going to read. And I'm going to invite a volunteer to read aloud. Let's see, Deb Wolf, you're at the top of my screen. Would you be so kind as to read first the heading next to source number 2 there, and then just the first sentence, the first full
Shabbat 21b.
Mm-hmm.
Before I asked, what is Hanukkah and why are lights kindled on Hanukkah?
Okay, perfect. Let's pause right there and tell me, can anyone tell me at least 2 things that should come as kind of a big surprise so far? What do you see so far within just that title and the first sentence? What catches you by surprise a little bit?
That lighting the candles and Hanukkah are 2 separate entities. Like Hanukkah might have existed without lighting the candles.
Hanukkah might have existed without lighting the candles. What is Hanukkah and why are lights? Oh, you mean that it's sort of 2 questions?
Yeah.
I see what you mean. Okay, fair enough. you're a little bit being misled here by the way this text has been translated. And this is important to note. The stuff that's in bold is the literal sort of word for word translation of the text as it appears in Aramaic and Hebrew. All the other non-bold stuff is basically added in by the commentary, added in by the translation in order to make that make sense and to sort of provide a running commentary. So the question as it appears is only just, what is Hanukkah? All the other stuff sort of sets that up. And why are lights kindled? That's sort of implied in that question. So good, you're getting at something interesting, I think. What else do you notice?
Why is it under the heading of Shabbat?
Okay, good, Anne. All right, wonderful. Where is Tractate Hanukkah and why is this not there? The answer is there is no Tractate Hanukkah, which is perhaps a little bit surprising. Hanukkah doesn't even get its own tractate. This comes up in Shabbat, of all things, not the sort of obvious connection you might make. We'll get back and sort of address these a little bit more. But maybe to piggyback a little bit on what Nathan was bringing up, it seems like sort of a strange question to ask, right? Like, don't they know what Hanukkah is? Like, didn't they celebrate it? Didn't they know what it was commemorating? Like, why is this the point where they begin their discussion about what Hanukkah is and why do we do what we do on Hanukkah? So the discussion of Hanukkah in the Talmud comes up kind of obliquely in the discussion in the second chapter of the tractate Shabbat, which is all about candle lighting. Sort of like, as long as we're talking about occasions when we light candles, here's this other occasion when we light candles, it's Hanukkah. And the discussion turns its attention to candle lighting on Hanukkah, specifically the rabbinic enactment requiring that candles be lit all throughout the holiday. Just so you know, I've reordered the selections of text a little bit for our discussion to make sense. It would be really, really sort of poetic, I think, for the very first mention of Hanukkah in the Talmud to be, what is Hanukkah? And that's just not quite correct. There's a little bit that comes before that where it's sort of, like I said, Hanukkah gets kind of introduced obliquely in this discussion of Hanukkah, or in this discussion of Shabbat. And some of what we're going to read later actually comes before, but it kind of doesn't matter for our purposes. I've selected a little bit here to make this make a bit more sense. But I think we've already learned something, even just from the place where this discussion comes and that initial question. I think we've learned something important already about the rabbinic understanding of what Hanukkah means. First, it's not so clearly from their standpoint in the sort of quote unquote pantheon of Jewish holidays that get their own tractates, right? We have tractates devoted to Purim. We have tractate devoted to Shabbat, obviously. A whole one devoted to Pesach, a whole one devoted to Rosh Hashanah, a whole one devoted to Yom Kippur. All the big holidays have their own, but Hanukkah, for whatever reason, doesn't. So that may suggest something about the rabbi's understanding of its relative importance to those other, in relationship to those other holidays. It also, in order for this to be a sensical question, it doesn't seem like it already has by the rabbi's time, a clearly understood normative or maybe absolute meaning. Its meaning needs to be constructed. And that's what the purpose of the whole Talmudic conversation here kind of is. Compare that to other Jewish holidays that have their roots in the Torah. Can you imagine that the rabbis would ever ask, my Pesach, what is Pesach? Well, no, we know what Pesach is. That's all about the Exodus and freedom from Egypt, right? Or my Rosh Hashanah. There's no question about Rosh Hashanah it's the beginning of the year. There's other ideas about it being the birthday of the world, but fundamentally, it's the turnover of the year cycle, right? But maybe, in those holidays are anchored in, even from the rabbi's perspective, which is 2,000 years before us, but even from their perspective, those other holidays are anchored in very ancient traditions and divinely ordained traditions. Maybe Hanukkah is not. We're going to read on a bit and see how the discussion plays out and learn a bit more about how the rabbis were understanding and constructing this meaning. Okay. Deb, thanks for letting me pause you for so long there. Would you mind continuing to read through the rest of that source?
The sages taught on the 25th of Kislev, the days of Hanukkah are 8. One may not eulogize on them and may not fast on them. What is the reason? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils that were in the sanctuary by touching them. And when the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious over them, they searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest, undisturbed by the Greeks. And there was sufficient oil. There was there to light the candelabrum for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from it 8 days. The next year, the sages institutionalized these days and made them holidays with recitation of Hallel and special thanksgiving in prayer and blessing.
Wonderful, Deb. Thank you. So a couple of vocab clarifications before we sort of break this out piece by piece. First, the Hasmoneans. Whenever you read that, you can just sort of mentally insert the word Maccabees, if that makes more sense. The Hasmoneans became basically after the Maccabees won their campaign against the Greeks, the dynasty that they set up to rule over an independent Jewish kingdom was called the Hasmonean dynasty. A cruse of oil is not a word I use all the time, but you can just think about a little jar of oil. And lastly, recitation of Hallel. Hallel is a liturgical term for a chunk of psalms, a series of them, which has been sort of made a regular reading on all sorts of festive occasions. It's usually sung. It's very, very happy and upbeat. It's all about praise. Hallel means to praise. They're all psalms of praise for God. Okay. So let's read, let's break this out a little bit. First.
Rabbi?
Oh yeah, please, Larry, go ahead.
So the Maccabees made themselves kings and ruled then?
Yeah, pretty much. Does that come as a surprise, it sounds like?
They didn't, there was no voting them in or anything like that?
No. So actually, this will come back a little bit later in terms of in terms of the legacy of the Hasmoneans, the legacy of the Maccabees, and where it ended up by the time of the rabbis. So keep that kind of maybe suspicious attitude a little bit in mind. But yeah, that's essentially what happened. The Hasmonean dynasty set itself up as the rulers. And yeah, ruled as an independent monarchy for some time until we'll get to that part. What happens? You could probably guess. Okay. So first, I would hope that a lot of this sounds familiar to folks who have some experience with Hanukkah. Hanukkah starts on the 25th of Kislev. It lasts 8 days. This line, one may not eulogize on them, one may not fast on them. What do you make of that line? What can you sort of infer about the rabbi's understanding of Hanukkah from that line? No eulogies and no fasting.
Rejoicing. It's a time of rejoicing.
Good.
Yeah.
Deb. Susan, did you have something to say too?
Sorry.
No, that's basically what I was going to say. It's a joyous celebration, not a sad one.
Good. Yes, exactly. That sounds sort of obvious, right? That a holiday would be a happy thing, but we kind of have some sad holidays too, and this is part of defining that actually this is a happy one. And it's sort of an interesting side discussion for another day here too about the interaction in between private mourning, things like eulogizing and fasting, things like that, with the sort of social aspect of celebration. The rabbis were sort of careful not to mix communal joy with public expressions of grief because of the effect that would have on the community. That's a very interesting discussion for separately. Yeah, Nathan, go ahead.
So when they say like don't eulogize, does that mean, this is probably to stem with my still being a student and not understanding, when they say you will not eulogize on Hanukkah, does that mean that they can't have any funeral services?
turns out, I mean, obviously the answer is no, because ultimately the value of a quick and dignified burial wins out here.
Right.
This idea gets fleshed out a lot more in subsequent discussions. The on one foot answer is that yes, you can bury, and yes, you can in fact eulogize. Basically, you just shouldn't overdo it. Like, you shouldn't really go overboard with the wailing or the the crying out. That's honestly what it comes down to, is because this is supposed to be a joyous occasion. We don't want to sort of harsh everyone's good time.
All right. So they'll bring lackeys to the funeral. I understand.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Kind
Maybe not.
Kind of. That's not too far off. Okay, so good. It's a happy holiday. And the rest of the story, I would hope that it sounds familiar. Who mentioned, just like sort of show of hands in the gallery view here, who mentioned something in their one sentence explanation about the meaning of Hanukkah? Who mentioned something about oil or a miracle? Yeah, I see Dolores. Yeah, Jessica, Anne. Yeah, a few people. Oh, Stephanie. Yeah, Holly, Davis, Stephanie. Yeah. So, okay, right? That's definitely the sort of regular, I would have to, think that's kind of one of the most common explanations here. And it comes right from here, right? That the Maccabees not only won, but the sort of meaning of Hanukkah comes from the search for oil and the fact that it lasted miraculously for 8 whole days until they were able to prepare some more. What, though, do you think would be the difference between this text as it's written and a different text that didn't have the miracle? Like, imagine the text just cut off right after the Hasmonean monarchy overcame them and emerged victorious. Stop. The next year, the sages instituted those days and made them holidays, right? Imagine the difference between this paragraph and that one. Like a paragraph without the mention of the oil. What does the miracle add?
Well, the miracle adds that God had a hand in it.
Ah, good, Margaret. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, it isn't one of the ones that specifically we were instructed, presumably by God, to fast or celebrate or whatever, but he at least had something to do with it, and the people in charge recognized that.
Ah, okay, good. And oh, sorry, Nathan, go ahead. Yeah, say more.
In that way, it kind of turns it from a secular holiday, a historical holiday, into a spiritual one. Good,
absolutely. So I think you both combined to hit the nail on the head here. I think there is yes, this is sort of working God into this, because up to that point there really is no mention necessarily. And so I think that reveals a little bit about the rabbinic understanding of what Hanukkah is about. Hanukkah is at some level God focused. It's fundamentally God oriented. Why might that be necessary to say here? Because we don't necessarily think that. We don't, in explanations about Rosh Hashanah or Pesach or whatever, we don't have to make that explicit. Why might that be something the rabbis feel like they need to say here? Compare the rabbinic understanding in the Talmud to a non-rabbinic account. So the source at the bottom there, source number 3, comes from the book of 2nd Maccabees. As you can infer from the number 2, there is in fact a 1st Maccabees. These are 2 books written in, well, the first one was probably written in Hebrew and translated into Greek. We only have it in the surviving Greek. 2nd Maccabees was probably written originally in Common Greek, and it's kind of an abridgment of the 1st Maccabees book. They tell the story of the Maccabees, but didn't end up becoming part of the Tanakh, part of the Hebrew Bible. They were preserved in Greek and primarily preserved because of their importance to non-Jews. They became part of the Apocrypha that became part of the Catholic Church's canon. Sorry, go ahead, Deb.
No, what?
Yes, I was wondering.
Oh, Susan.
What?
Oh, your question is what? Like, that's a surprise. I see. So, yeah, that may well come as a surprise. Yeah, Yeah, the book of so there is no mention of Hanukkah or Maccabees in the Hebrew Bible. Basically, the Hanukkah as we know it, or Hanukkah, the holiday as we know it, comes into Judaism through the rabbinic introduction of it here in the Talmud. The record, the sort of historical, I'm going to put scare quotes around historical record of the Maccabees, actually comes to us through these non-canon sources. That said, they were, at least Second Maccabees was thought to have been written about 124 BCE or so. So many, several centuries before the rabbis wrote their idea about the miracle. So, it's an important witness in terms of the historical evolution of the understanding of what Hanukkah meant, basically. Let's see, someone who's off of mute who hasn't read yet. Maybe Dolores, would you be interested in reading from Second Maccabees there for us?
They celebrated it for 8 days with rejoicing in the manner of the Feast of Tabernacles. Mindful of how but a little while before the Festival of Tabernacles, they had been wandering about like wild beasts in the mountains and caves. That is why, bearing fiercely and graceful branches and palm leaves, they offered to God who had given them success in purifying God's own place of worship. They decreed by edict and confirmed by vote that the entire nation of the Jews should celebrate these days every year.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dolores. Okay. This is significantly different, right? Just off the top, we have the origin of the 8 days had nothing to do with oil or a miracle. They celebrate it in the manner of Sukkot, what they call, sort of funny sounding English to me, the Feast of Tabernacles. And the reason was because they were thinking about how they had basically just missed the previous Sukkot. They were busy fighting in the mountains and living in caves, fighting a guerrilla war against the Assyrian Greeks. And so they had missed Sukkot. So Hanukkah was not only for them a rededication of the temple, at least according to Maccabees' version of the story, it was also sort of a Sukkot redux, a Sukkot part 2, a make-up Sukkot. And that's why we get the 8-day time period. In case you're curious what Thursai are, I had to look that one up. It's one of these guys. It's like a wand or a staff, and I'm just going to quote from Wikipedia here. Made of giant fennel, covered with ivy vines and leaves, sometimes wound with ribbons, topped with a pine cone or a bunch of vine leaves and grapes, or ivy leaves and berries. It's sort of a Greek celebration object. Not really important, but I just thought you might be interested in that. So they went and celebrated and offered up songs to God. That part actually tracks with what we have, singing and celebrating. Success in purifying the temple, that also tracks with what we heard. And they instituted this observance from then on. So I'm curious, how many folks told the story in their one sentence explanation of Hanukkah that was a little bit more like this, that that was about the Maccabees or about victory or something like that? See a few hands. Deb and Leah and Lisa and Lynn. Yeah, I think a few folks maybe got both in there. But generally speaking, I would guess if I had to wager on what most responses would be to the question, what does Hanukkah mean, would give me one or the other of those two. It's either about the oil or it's about the Maccabees, or maybe you'd find a way to work in both, right? But what's
Rabbi?
Yeah, please.
I thought sorry, go ahead.
Explain to me again where the Maccabees, the older
book?
version, where that is located. And
sure.
Yeah.
So it's despite that it tells the story of a bunch of Jews, it hasn't gotten preserved as a Jewish source necessarily. It didn't make it into what they call the canon, the selection of books that became our Bible. It didn't make the cut, which is interesting. Actually, I think.
But the Book of Esther did.
But the Book of Esther did, yes. Interestingly, I think that there's some scholarly speculation about why that might be. There might be some theologically problematic ideas in there. We don't really know. That whoever made that decision didn't leave us any notes behind to talk about that. The reason we still know what they are is they got preserved basically by the Catholic Church and by other non-Jewish, basically religious canons that held on to these books and passed them down. They were written much closer to the events they purport to describe than the rabbinic account. So their importance to our discussion here is basically to show at an earlier level, or in an earlier era, it was more about the Maccabees and more about the victory. And the 8 days had to do with Sukkot. And at some point later, roughly, the rabbis were somehow involved. There was a switch away from Sukkot and military victory to 8 days of oil and miracle. Does that kind of make sense, Susan?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Was there another question in there too?
Oh, I wanted to know who the they was.
Okay. And I saw Deb's hand as well. The they. Oh, I have to presume the Maccabees.
Oh, okay.
Or the Jews. Deb, what was your question?
My question is, how much does this do with the Universal Festival of Light in Europe and in the Middle East?
Probably little. If anything, I would expect this to come before that. I don't totally know what you're referring to in terms of Universal Festival. You mean the fact that that Christmas happens about the same time and is sort of a light and darkness kind of a...
The solstice, jumping over the flames, the darkness,
okay.
Light and darkness. That may be a discussion that'll take us far afield. So
I'd say put a pin in that for a little bit later.
Okay.
In terms of, I think thinking of Hanukkah that way is not unheard of, right? We're going to get to sort of other meanings beyond just these two in a little bit. Okay. Other questions before we continue?
I was just going to mention that to me, it's about regaining and keeping your heritage.
Good.
That's basically what the Maccabees did, and we celebrate that they retrieved the Jewish heritage, and it's about that.
I would identify with that sentiment as well, and we'll talk a little bit later about the continuing evolution of the meaning of Hanukkah, basically.
Yeah, and there was one other comment.
Please.
Some of us write letters for the Jewish Earth Alliance, some of us in the Sustainability Committee.
Yeah.
And they go to our members of Congress. We do it once a month. And they're about climate related. And this month, it's about climate related. Mm-hmm. And they make a Hanukkah type of message that, really Hanukkah is about energy efficiency, because we created 8 times as much light with the fuel for 1 time. So you see,
I love it.
The fuel for 1x of light, and we got 8.
I love it.
It's really about saving the world.
Beautiful.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, well, but like I said, we're gonna get to sort of more expansive ideas about the meaning of Hanukkah. But let's think back to our examination of the rabbis and how they understood it. So it appears that the rabbis basically added the part about the miracle, right? At least from just comparing these sort of textual witnesses. And in fact, that's borne out basically. We can't necessarily say for sure that the rabbis added it, because maybe there's a source that we just don't have that wasn't preserved. But in terms of the sources that we do have, this is where the miracle story comes up first. And interestingly, also not even in the Mishnah, which was 200 to 300 years before the Talmud. It comes up in the 5th century version of the Talmud. So now we're talking at least 700 years after the events that are supposedly described. 600 or 700 years. So why add in a miracle? We already suggested the sort of theologization of the story, right? It's the introducing God into the story. If you've studied Megillat Esther, the story of Esther around Purim, one of the sort of critiques of that is God's not really in the story, and that's part of the rabbinic project, was to add God back in there too. So this was sort of track with that. I think it's there are a lot of theories about why the rabbis would bother to add. It could have been due to the subsequent history of the Hasmoneans. As I mentioned, they set up a dynasty and ruled over an independent Jewish state. However, whereas they initially started out as anti-Hellenizers, they were anti-Greek and wanted to stop Greek culture from infiltrating and suppressing essentially Jewish religion and culture. They eventually became Hellenizers. And eventually, actually, some of them opposed and even persecuted the rabbis and their predecessors. So there could be some kind of anti-Hasmonean sentiment on the part of the rabbis. And actually, it was the Hasmonean dynasts fighting with each other over leadership that eventually led to Rome coming in and taking over, and we all know where that ended as well. The rabbis themselves would have been living under Roman rule, at least through the early Mishnaic era, and so they might have felt obliged to censor the story somewhat. A story of a successful revolt by a handful of Jews against a powerful enemy would not have played very well in, if the Romans found out about that. There were revolts against Rome in 70 and then again in 135. And finally, it's also possible that the story of winning a military victory and establishing independence kind of just lost its importance to people over time. The Hasmonean dynasty itself lasted only about 100 years, which in the scheme of Jewish history is not that long. So it's possible that this could have been an innovation, basically, on the part of the rabbis to make Hanukkah's importance last through succeeding generations. They may have sort of done this deliberately, saying, we know that people aren't going to care about that military victory that didn't end up having lasting consequences anyway. We need to morph the meaning of Hanukkah into something that people are going to continue to connect with and to continue to understand and feel as important. So they may have deliberately decided to emphasize the kind of spiritual meaning, right, and the symbolism of the Hanukkah menorah. This theory that this is sort of a deliberate spiritualizing of Hanukkah is the most interesting, I think, under which to explore some of the other nearby passages in Talmud that outline the ritual observance of Hanukkah. So as we go into these next sessions, we can kind of ask, how did these rituals support this spiritualized or the symbolic meaning of Hanukkah as the rabbis are now choosing to understand it? Okay, questions before we go on? Joni, please.
Yeah, well, why would the rabbis even bother to include the Maccabee story if they're just going to throw it out anyway? Why is it important? Why would they even care?
It's a valid question. I think that, I think the scholarly thinking is that Hanukkah was already popular. And so people were celebrating Hanukkah as kind of already as a folk tradition, because clearly it came to the rabbis somewhat fully formed. So it may have been sort of we can't sort of cut it off from its roots completely and expect people to just suddenly understand it completely different. They sort of had to harmonize the earlier understanding with the one they wanted to go with. And so they sort of had to work the story of the Maccabees together with their more spiritualized understanding. That would be my best guess. But it is, I think, a valid question too, if they're just going to change the meaning, sort of what's the point of hanging on to anything? But that actually, sort of gets into the larger rabbinic process, the larger rabbinic project, which is to really maintain some kind of continuity with history while also adapting to changing circumstances.
It didn't have anything to do with giving the Jewish kids something to look forward to around Christmas.
Yeah, obviously this is very early Christianity. And when we get back to sort of what does Hanukkah mean to you now, I wouldn't be surprised if there were a number of folks who sort of view Hanukkah as in some way a counterbalance or counterpart to Christmas.
I don't know that it had to be against Christmas. Most cultures have a midwinter festival that involves light.
Yeah, right, and that's what Deb was getting at too. Mm-hmm. That's entirely possible.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
Regarding that question of why add the miracle in there?
Yeah.
Would it maybe be to emphasize more that the Jews are the chosen people and that there was intentionality in their win over the Maccabees? It didn't just kind of happen. I mean, over the Greeks, it didn't kind of just happen, but it was helped because they are the chosen.
Good. Actually, I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that's something I had kind of wanted to touch on too, but had kind of forgotten. Interestingly, like God is not left out of the Maccabees version here, right? It mentions that they offered up, praise to God, basically, as thanks for their victory. So there was, even before the rabbis introduced the miracle part, there is a way to understand this as God having a role here, in that God is the one who produces military victories. And understood that way, there's sort of no need to theologize. So I think that can't be the only explanation for the miracle part. It's maybe an enhancement of the sort of God-orientedness, but there must have been something else going on. It couldn't have been just about adding in God where God wasn't explicit. Because the older Maccabees version kind of had that in some ways. Good. Okay, let's go on and read some more Talmud. Oh, that's our thirsty. Okay. So these other sections are a little bit more from the continuing discussion of Hanukkah, where the rabbis get into some of the essential observances of Hanukkah and what's involved. I think we'll just go ahead and read this one through, and then we'll double back and talk about what it means. We're going to kind of get into the ritual observance, and maybe this will, have some consequences for what you do at home, and maybe it won't. But we're going to kind of look at it, not so much to determine exactly what are we supposed to be doing, but more, what are the rabbis getting at this? How does the rabbis' discussion here enlighten our understanding of what they think this all means? Okay. Let's see, who else would like to read? I've already called on Dolores and Deborah and Margaret. Would you like to read? You're already off of mute.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
The sages taught in Baraita. The basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light kindled by a person and their household. And the Me'adrin, those who meticulous in the performance of mitzvah, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. Okay, are even more meticulous. Adjust the number of lights daily. Bet Shemami and Bet Hillel disagree as to the nature of that adjustment. Why is this not a surprise? They say the first day on the first day, one kindles 8 lights, and from then on gradually decrease the number of lights until on the last day of Hanukkah, he kindles 1 light. And the Bet Hillel say on the first day, one kindles 1 light, and from there on gradually increases the number of lights until on the last day, he kindles 8 lights.
Okay, let's pause you there, because the rest is sort of explanation of that. There's a lot of vocab, and this is maybe a little bit hard to follow. So first, a baraita. This is sort of, Talmud Study 101. If you're interested, baraita means outside in Aramaic. So it's a rabbinic source from the time of the Mishnah, but that didn't make it into the Mishnah. So imagine the Mishnah is sort of like the final theatrical release of a movie. A baraita is the stuff that's in the director's cut. It's the clips of film that get left on the floor of the editor's workstation, right? So this is still considered an important and authoritative tradition, but it wasn't necessarily in the Mishnah. So they're bringing it here to say, they're to basically learn from their existing tradition. The basic mitzvah is you each day have a light kindled by a person in their household. That's it. Now the mehadrin, in other words, those who are meticulous in the performance of mitzvot, and lehader is to glorify, to embellish, something like that. They light a light for each and every one in their household. So in the Bressler family, that would look like 4 lights right? One for me, one for Amanda, one for Panina, and one for Judah. And the Mihadrin, Minha Mihadrin, like the most punctilious of the punctilious, they adjust the number of lights daily. Now, which one of those three, whether it's like a single light each night, or one for everyone in your house, or the adjusting the number each night, sounds the most like what you do at home? Congratulations, you are all Mihadrin Minha Mihadrin. You are all the most punctilious observers of the festival of Hanukkah. It's my honor to be among such illustrious company. So how did we get there to the practice you probably already know of one candle on the first night, two on the second night, and so on? Well, there's this discussion between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Beit means house, and probably better translated here as like the school of Shammai, who was one rabbi, and the school of Hillel. And these two are frequently set up in sources like this as sort of being foils for one another and sort of always having opposite sides of whatever discussion. And also notably, Hillel almost always wins. So Shammai says, what you do is kindle 8 on the first night and count down, gradually decrease until on the last night it's one night. And Hillel says on the first day you do it the other way. One light the first night, 2, and so on, which is ultimately what we do. Now, the resolution of that discussion comes here in the second paragraph, which basically just says it's a story that there were 2 elders in Sidon, which is, I believe that's equivalent to the city of Tyre. I think it's Akko now in Israel. I'd have to look that one up. In any case, there was a story about 2 elders, and one of them did the Shammai thing, and one of them did the Hillel thing. And how do we know? Because Shammai and Hillel, we don't have any record of why they said what they said, but these elders did. And one gave his reason, and he said, here, let me finish. One gave a reason and said, it corresponds to the bulls of the festival of Sukkot, which is really an oblique reference. In the Torah, it says you count down, there's like the most number of bulls sacrificed on the first day, and so on and so forth. So they're saying, like, oh, I guess this has to do with Sukkot, we should do it that way. Whereas the other one says we elevate to a higher level in matters of sanctity and not downgrade. In other words, it's sort of undignified. It doesn't feel like a holy practice to count down. What we do is we count up. Okay, Larry, what were you going to say?
I'm going to say that on mute, Joni and I had this little side conversation that I said, as an engineer, makes sense for the light to go down, right?
Sure.
The oil burning down. She says,
oh, sure, yeah.
As a spiritual person, as opposed to an engineer,
right?
It makes sense to
go up. Sure.
Yes.
Now they both, I think, in a way, accomplish an important purpose, right? How do you know what night of Hanukkah it is? You look at the menorah, right? You look at the Hanukkah and you count how many candles. Now, both can accomplish that. Although one I think is more intuitively obvious from a person who doesn't necessarily know, is Hanukkah an 8-day festival or a 9-day festival or 10? If you're just adding one each time, you always know what day it is. If you're counting down, you sort of have to do some math. But in any case, they both accomplish that purpose, right?
Yeah, but I always did it the other way. How do you know how many candles? You count what night of Hanukkah it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Right.
What night is it?
Right.
How many candles?
A chicken or the egg problem, I suppose. Yeah. So I think examining this question. So I mean, here we're sort of in the weeds with a question of practice, right? And this seems like almost like, who cares? Like we just, as long as we all get on the same page, maybe what difference does it make? But I think we actually, viewed from the perspective of how does this discussion inform our understanding of what the rabbis understood Hanukkah to mean? I think it's that last line. It's the debate over how to light, whether up or down, seems kind of academic, but the conclusion reveals that this is understood to have a spiritual meaning. They understood this to be a matter of kedusha, a matter of sanctity or holiness, right? And it lends itself, I think, when you understand the menorah lighting, to not just be a just a light, sort of a memorial to the fallen Maccabees or something like that, but to be actually symbolic of the light in the temple and the light of a miracle. It lends itself much more easily to symbolic, almost creative interpretation of the menorah and the Hanukkah, menorah or Hanukkah. Those are both correct terms, by the way. I'll give you my rant after that later. It can be understood as light in the darkness, you know, along the lines of what Deb and I think Margaret were suggesting of you know, a winter light festival, bringing light into the darkness of winter. It can be understood as remanifesting God's presence, you know, in a place where it's been absent. It's more easily understood as symbolic of Jewish pride or solidarity or something. Any of the other myriad explanations that we now sort of load on to Hanukkah, it's a lot easier to understand when you understand the menorah as somehow spiritualized, as somehow a matter of sanctity, and not just, you know, oh, we won, great.
Go team.
Go team, exactly. Right, and it's also still that to some extent, but it's more. It's more now. Okay. Questions about Hillel and Shammai, or anything, or about menorah lighting? You're on Mehadrin, Minha Mehadrin. I know you know what you're doing. Okay. Okay. Let's check out source number 6, which is going to bring something new into the conversation. How about Leah? I haven't asked you to read yet, have I?
No.
You mind reading source number 6 there?
The sages taught in the Baraita the mitzvah to place the Hanukkah lamp at the entrance to one's house on the outside so that all can see it. If one lived upstairs, they placed it at the window adjacent to the public domain. And in a time of danger, when the Gentiles issued decrees to prohibit kindling lights, they placed it on the table, and that is sufficient to fulfill their obligation.
Thank you. So we have something really new here, right? That previous section told us only about lighting, right? And kind of about how to light it, but it didn't tell us anything beyond that. And here, the focus was really, you know, the lighting is almost for granted. And what matters here is actually the placement, right? It's a mitzvah to place the lamp at the entrance to your house or outside so that everyone can see it. Or if you're upstairs and your entrance is not at the, you know, at sort of eye level down there at the, you know, at the level of the marketplace or whatever, you put it in your window adjacent to the public domain. That's why of all the places I could put the electric menorah at Beit Am, I've selected the kitchen window, which, you know, maybe not, you would expect maybe I would put it in the sanctuary or something like that. But in fact, that is the one, the window adjacent to Circle Boulevard and where most folks are going to be able to see that should they drive by, right? So another aspect of lighting the menorah and the mitzvah of Hanukkah seems to be making it visible to others, right? How does this reflect the rabbi's understanding of the meaning of Hanukkah? Well, in addition to being a you know, sort of a spiritual symbol, a matter of introducing holiness, God's light, something like that into the world, there's something here too about manifesting it in the world, you know, sort of maybe making God real somehow in a way that happens through sharing with others. You know, this is somehow not just something that we do for ourselves, but something that we also do for others. And interestingly, not even just other Jews. It's not, you know, it's not put it where other Jews only can see it. It's put it adjacent to the public domain, right? Where anybody can see it. So I think this some way also speaks to, it's in some way about Jewish interaction with the non-Jewish world. And Hanukkah's starting to take on in the rabbinic imagination, you know, this dimension of the interaction between Jew and non-Jew, right? Or, you know, sort of a navigation of that interaction. We've lived as a persecuted minority among non-Jews, and we've lived as a tolerated minority among non-Jews. And Hanukkah, I think you can see the beginnings of the way Hanukkah is starting to serve to highlight that interaction, right? And maybe navigate that a little bit. And when I think about this, I think about the way Hanukkah sort of has come to serve in the United States as the Jewish counter to Christmas, something like that, right? Why do we give gifts on Hanukkah? You'll note we haven't said anything about gift giving. That's entirely a result of sort of bleed off from Christmas onto Hanukkah. We give gifts on Hanukkah because that's when all our non-Jewish friends around us are doing in December, more or less. So I think we're starting to really develop and like make this kind of, what was like an almost one-dimensional or two-dimensional understanding of the meaning of Hanukkah is starting to become this kind of more vibrant, multi-dimensional understanding based on these discussions the rabbis are having. What are your thoughts? Any questions or comments about menorah lighting?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So when did Hanukkah gelt come into being? Why is it money?
Gelt is a Yiddish word, so I'm guessing that has something to do with Ashkenazim in Europe. I don't know that a complete answer to that on the top of my head. I do know that the gift giving that was more customary prior to the sort of Christmatization of Hanukkah a little bit with the present giving, or maybe it's just commercialization of Hanukkah, was to give gifts of money and like, coins to children and stuff like that as a gift for Hanukkah. So I think it's sort of a carryover of that. But whereas like, giving my 2-year-old, a couple of coins, he's just going to eat them anyway. Might as well give him chocolate ones, right? I don't know. I would have to look up. I'm sure someone has written or researched the origin of that custom a little more, but I don't actually know.
Well,
I don't. Go ahead.
I was thinking that, like you say, Jews were either tolerated or whatever. That this was a symbol of pride in Judaism to show that you're Jewish in this world by putting your menorah in the window for everybody to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that.
Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, please, Deb. Yeah.
Well, I just like to say it was also not only pride, but that we're here more than you think. Because when we were living in New York, they had this huge Christmas tree every year, but they didn't have a menorah. And when we moved in, we insisted they have a menorah. And of course, we put one out too. But the feeling was there was a lot of how can you say it? Jews, Arabs, all this kind of stuff going on in New York. So it was kind of a not only pride, but we are here in a lot of numbers and we want to be it's like any other, movement of
right.
That we're
that's a great point, both of you. That's sort of another dimension of the Jewish encounter with the non-Jewish surrounding is needing to sometimes reinforce that sense of pride or that sense of solidarity or
numbers.
I mean, yeah, right. Or like you can almost imagine. I'm certain this has happened. Just because it hasn't happened to me, I'm certain it has. Seeing the apartment across the way light up their menorah and going, "Oh, I didn't know that person was Jewish," right? And now because they lit the menorah in their window or something. Like it has this sort of Hanukkah has this aspect of bringing Jews together with other Jews, or at least being a kind of nonverbal communication between them within a non-Jewish surrounding where they otherwise wouldn't necessarily meet or encounter one another. Yeah, those are all really good. This is all like further manifestations of these meanings of Hanukkah that weren't initially present. I thought I saw someone else taking stuff off of you. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the Chabad putting this huge Hanukkah in Washington Square and other parts of New York and everywhere else, that there was a sense of making it, I'm sorry to put it this way, but almost in your face that there it was. And,
I mean, I think that's a certain, sort of playing this idea out to a certain possible conclusion, right? I don't know. It sounds kind of fun. I've what do you think? Should I get like one of those big car-mounted menorahs and drive around Corvallis with the the Hanukkah on? That's probably not me, but I think that's a sort of pushing the envelope on that idea of sort of we're here and we're proud to be Jewish despite our minority status, right? Something like that. Good. Okay, I have one more chunk and it's kind of a long one, so I want to get there, not to curtail this conversation. We'll go a bit quickly through it. Okay, I did my very best to fit this all on one page so we wouldn't have to flip back and forth. Let's see. Is there anyone who feels like reading? You don't have to read the whole thing. I'll let you read a chunk and then tap out. How about maybe Nathan? Oh, sorry, you were about to take it. You mind starting reading there at the top?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is on the next page. This is just a little bit further on in the Talmud discussion.
All right. A dilemma was raised before the sages. In the case of the Hanukkah light, does lighting accomplish the mitzvah? And placing the lit lamp is simply a continuation of that action, or does placing the kindled lamp accomplish the mitzvah? And lighting is simply a practical necessity that facilitates placing the lamp.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right there. So this is like very classic Talmud. You didn't even like, did you even realize that these two ideas, the placing the lamp and lighting the lamp, were even potentially in conflict? Well, surprise, they totally are. The rabbis want to know now, well, what is the actual mitzvah? What is it I need to do in order to fulfill my obligation? Is it just lighting the mitzvah, and wherever I put it is sort of gravy after that? Or is the putting it down the important thing? Is it putting it where people can see it? And, maybe lighting is just sort of, like it says, a practical necessity that facilitates placing the lamp. We're sort of bringing these ideas into conversation. And I say this is sort of classical, rabbis in the Talmud, because this is sort of how the process of straightening out our values and what we care about most, this is how this process works. It sort of takes two things we care about. We care about lighting, and we care about showing it, publicizing, showing it off. Well, let's sort of bunk them together and see what wins out, right? And that's kind of where this discussion goes. And basically they try to resolve this issue. As it said, you can hear it, you just look at the top of each paragraph, come in here in resolution. We're going to propose a resolution based on something that another rabbi said, and see if we can learn something from what that rabbi said that'll help us resolve our difficulty. And you can probably imagine that because there's three of them, the first two are not going to work. They're not going to stick. But Nathan, why don't you go ahead and read that first one? Come and hear a resolution from what Rava said.
Come and hear a resolution, Rava said. One who is holding a burning Hanukkah lamp in his hand and standing accomplished nothing. Conclude from this that placing accomplishes the mitzvah. Until one sets the lamp down in its appropriate place, they did not fulfill the mitzvah. Mm-hmm. The Gemara rejects this. There, Rava ruled for a different reason. One who sees it will say they are not holding the lamp in order to fulfill the mitzvah, but rather they are holding it for their own needs. Since holding the lamp can mislead onlookers, the mitzvah is not fulfilled in that manner.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan. Okay. Are we able to follow this so far? So we have this tradition that the rabbis already know. Rava was a smart guy and a rabbi and presumably knew what he was doing. Therefore, he couldn't possibly be wrong about this. One who was holding a burning Hanukkah lamp in his hand and standing accomplished nothing. In other words, accomplished nothing vis-a-vis the mitzvah of Hanukkah. In other words, he hasn't fulfilled his obligation yet. So maybe we can conclude from Rava's statement that Rava thinks that placing the lamp is what's important. And if Rava thinks it, then there we go. We've resolved this. But that doesn't stick because they're going to say Rava actually, he had something else in mind. What he was saying is he wasn't talking about fulfilling the mitzvah exactly, or that, that the putting it down is what's important. He was talking about, you need to make it obvious to people walking by that this is a lamp for the purpose of Hanukkah. Now, remember, we think of Hanukkah lamp and think, 8 branches and a shamus, right? Well, we just saw in the previous passage, that's only for the Mahadran min HaMahadran, right? It's entirely possible, especially given what I presume, oil is probably expensive, lighting 9 lamps, and remember, for each person in your house is a lot of oil and a lot of lamps. Probably each person was lighting 1 candle, right? How are you supposed to know what that candle is for? Unless you see it at the proper time and displayed in such a sort of conveyed by the manner in which it's lit, that this is a Hanukkah lamp, right? So Rav is saying, someone who sees you holding that lamp there isn't going to, properly assume that it is what you intend it to be. They're going to assume you're just holding it so you can see what you're doing, or, to warm yourself up or whatever it is. And because that can be misleading to people, that's why it accomplishes nothing. You can't fulfill the mitzvah by just standing there and holding a lamp. So let's try another solution. How about, who hasn't read yet? Maybe Anne, can I call on you?
Sure.
All right, go for it.
Okay, so come in here, another resolution, says Rava. So one who lights the Hanukkah lamp inside the house and then takes it out and places it at the entrance accomplished nothing.
Oh man, I thought we were going to get somewhere. Okay, go ahead.
Granted, if you say that lighting accomplishes the mitzvah, it's understandable, as lighting in its place is required. That is why Rava ruled that one accomplished nothing. However, if you say that placing accomplishes the mitzvah, why did Rava rule that one accomplished nothing? Didn't they set it down in its appropriate place? The Gemara answers there too, even though they brought it outside, one who sees them lighting inside will say to themselves that they are lighting the lamp for their own needs and not in fulfillment of the mitzvah.
Okay, so ultimately for a similar reason, but you might think that we would get there by solving the initial problem. If you lit it inside, but then put it out where someone can see it, maybe that solves our problem. And placing the lamp is what really matters. But no, that actually doesn't work. Because they could still think, if they saw you light it inside, they might say, oh, he just doesn't want to waste his oil or whatever, or maybe he just needs the light for himself over here by the window or by the entrance. They're not going to get the right impression still. And what matters is not only like the lighting of the lamp still matters. That's somehow part of conveying the significance of this Hanukkah menorah is the light being lit for the purpose of Hanukkah and also displayed for the purpose of Hanukkah. So we're getting closer to a resolution, but we're not quite there. Let's see. Who else can I pick on? Maybe Jessica, do you mind reading a third attempt at a resolution?
No, here we go.
Go for it. All right, you got it.
Come and hear another resolution, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said. A lantern that continued to burn the entire day of Shabbat. At the conclusion of Shabbat, one extinguishes it and lights it again as a Hanukkah light. Okay,
I'm gonna pause you right there because you might think that, oh, I have this light still lit. Maybe I could just go put that outside and use the same thing. I don't need to do a relighting. That's not gonna work. Go ahead, continue.
Granted, if you say that lighting accomplishes the mitzvah, the requirement to extinguish and relight works out well.
Right, because you would need to relight it specifically for Hanukkah. You can't just reuse an old light. Okay.
Right. However, if you say that placing accomplishes the mitzvah, this statement, one extinguishes it and lights it, is imprecise. It needed to say, one extinguishes it and lifts it from its place and sets it down and lights it, as only by placing the lamp in an appropriate place could one fulfill the mitzvah.
Good. And because Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi didn't say that and said the more restricted form, that all you have to do is put it out and light it, the implication is the lighting is the mitzvah. The lighting is what's more important, and the placing it is a continuation of that. As it says above, placing the kindling lamp is simply a practical necessity. No, I'm sorry, it's the other one. Placing the lamp is a conclusion of the action of lighting. The mitzvah is lighting together, lighting in its place there in the window. Okay. Furthermore, and here we really bring the conclusion to a close, there's additional proof from the fact that we recite the following blessing. And if this was in Hebrew, this would potentially sound actually more familiar, interestingly. Who has made us holy through God's commandments and commanded us to light the Hanukkah light. That's Asher Kichanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu lahadlik shel Hanukkah. So conclude from that is the blessing we recite, and not over the placing, that it's the lighting itself that accomplishes the mitzvah. And it's over the act of lighting, you recite the blessing. So the Gemara concludes, indeed, conclude from this. Okay.
Why wouldn't the entire process be the mitzvah that incorporates both?
Right. So the key is that it's all one act together. We said that, and you're right that it is actually that it's the lighting and the placing, but the placing has to happen first, basically. If you light it somewhere else and then bring it, that can cause confusion. That was the second Rava quote. That doesn't work because someone might get confused. Yeah. You got to put it where it belongs and light it there. And that's the mitzvah, because that's the only way you can fulfill both of the ideas back on the previous page, that the mitzvah is to light for yourself and also to show it off, right? Anything short of that is going to lead people to get the wrong impression. Does that kind of make sense, Leah?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right. So ultimately, lighting the menorah in its appropriate place, which is somewhere, like we said, that's visible from outside, is the essential mitzvah of Hanukkah. Why does this matter, right? From, within our discussion where we're trying to figure out what the rabbis think Hanukkah means, I think this again speaks to the navigation of the sort of Jew-non-Jew relationship. If the goal is to communicate something through our ritual, either to others in the non-Jewish surrounds, or to other Jews within that kind of non-Jewish context, you have to consider the reception of your message from an outsider's perspective. And lighting a lamp that's not in such a unique way that message is going to get across, that's not going to cut it. That's not going to address what the rabbis understand to be the meaning of Hanukkah, or at least an aspect of the meaning of Hanukkah. And at the same time, it's not just about publicizing the miracle. The individual act is still important. The individual act of lighting, and that spiritual act of kindling fire, bringing light into the darkness, all that kind of stuff, well, that's still part of the meaning of Hanukkah too. And that's still important. Okay. So to bring this around to a bit of a conclusion, is anyone interested in sharing their second sentence? What did you write about what Hanukkah means to you?
Mine's a little bit secular.
Go for it, Nathan. Dolores, I saw you're next. Okay, go ahead, Nathan. Yeah.
I wrote down warmth in the darkness.
Warmth in the darkness. Excellent. Dolores.
A time to celebrate the endurance of Judaism.
Ah, very good. Very good. Anyone else? Who else would like to share?
I said getting together with family, eating latkes, lighting the menorah, and bringing light into the darkness.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Joni. Who else there? I see maybe Leah or Margaret. I see you off of mute. That puts you in position to be called upon.
Well, I put sharing childhood memories and when David and I got together and sort of teaching him about the meaning of Hanukkah and us starting to form our own traditions.
Good, good. Wonderful. Margaret, what did you write?
That it's the part represents the freedom to choose.
Good.
Back when they revered their leaders as gods, and naturally clashed with the Jewish viewpoint on this, but it let them free to be Jews. And now we have, a constitution that says we're free, but
yeah,
it's a way to, in a small way, demonstrate that you are a Jew.
Good. Awesome. I love the variety here. This is amazing. Anyone else feel like sharing? You can just take yourself off of mute.
I also talked about bringing light to the darkness, but light as a symbol of hope. So that hope during a dark time of year.
Great. Thanks, Holly. That's awesome.
Okay.
Larry,
Family fun, gathering with other Jews, an alternative to Christmas.
There we go.
Latkes.
Yeah.
Thinking about the preservation of our heritage and lighting the menorah.
It's one long sentence, but I like it. Great job. Wonderful. Wonderful. Did anyone write anything that hasn't been covered already? Okay.
Just one last thing. My little sisters know. So we didn't grow up in the faith, but we have family that were part of the culture, and although we didn't go to synagogue or anything like that, we did do Hanukkah every year as children. And my little sister wrote, "Reconnecting with our roots" was just a reminder that we are descended from a heritage and from a people.
Good. Yeah. The peoplehood aspect is an important one to me as well. Great. So the big idea, I would say, of this this shiur is, partially to take you through some Talmud because I think it's good for you to get exposed, and I like it. But the bigger idea is really that the meaning, and to demonstrate really to you that the meaning of Hanukkah has changed over time. It meant something to the generations who lived right after the events of the Hanukkah story, and it meant something different to the generations around the rabbis, and it meant something to the descendants of those rabbis, and it meant something different to all the generations of Jews who led up to us today, and it means something different to us and to each of us, and it will continue to mean something different to generations beyond. So in a lot of ways, what the rabbis did was not so much define once and for all the absolute meaning of Hanukkah. What they did was encode in this conversation, in this discussion, almost like the rules for meaning making, sort of the guidance for you to figure out what Hanukkah means to you. And in that way, to keep it vital and keep it important for generations to come. Because who cares about a military victory 2,500 years ago, right? But a lot of us do care about family and latkes and light in the darkness and Jewish identity, right? They sort of gave us the technology to make meaning through the holiday of Hanukkah for ourselves in an ongoing way. And I want to leave you with a quote that I really kind of sums this up from a really great book I recommend for all sorts of holiday learning, called The Jewish Holidays, a guide and commentary by Michael Strassfeld. I borrowed this particular one from the Beit Am Library, so as soon as I put it back there, you're welcome to come and get it yourself. But Edward L. Greenstein, who is a faculty person at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, writes in here that the fact that different Jewish communities have found various meanings in Hanukkah drives home the truth about all religious rituals. They thrive only when they mean something to people, when they externalize deeply felt concerns. Often, when we reattach to a ritual, we will infuse it with special meaning or manifest some latent significance in it. In other cases, a ritual may fall out of use for lack of contemporary impact. Yet the Jews have had the wisdom to keep even underutilized rituals on the books. As circumstances change, we may rediscover their power at some later time. So what I love about this is how he sort of implies what I like to think, that all of those meanings we listed about, latkes and Jewish identities, those are all in some way, even back when the rabbis were discerning their own meanings, those meanings were already there. Those are in some ways latent meanings within Hanukkah. What we're doing is basically just reconnecting to that ritual and resurfacing those meanings because we need them for whatever reason, or because they speak to us. And so it's not so much that Hanukkah has really fundamentally changed. It's more that we've changed in our perspective, in our needs, in our contemporary circumstances, that means there's also power left for us to discover. And as we continue on and think about, what our needs are going into Hanukkah this year, we're essentially empowered, just as the rabbis were, and just as generations have been, to dig for new meanings all the time. Thank you so much, friends. If there's any further questions, I'm happy to hang around and chat. And thank you all so much for learning with me. Happy Hanukkah.